Hi, this is Andrew Connell with Critical Path Training, and I want to talk a little bit about how to create custom applications using the BCS infrastructure in the BCS Connectivity Services module. So what we want to do here, talking about a little bit about some of the solution types and personas, there's really two different kinds of solutions that we can create. We can create things that are a little more simple and things that are a little more advanced. The simple solutions, what's nice with the simple solutions here is that these are going to give us the ability to empower our power users and business users to create complex applications, but without the involvement of developers or IT pros. And so they'll be able to use tools like InfoPath and SharePoint Designer in the browser to create these really cool applications here that will be able to integrate back-end data into SharePoint, and then also be able to leverage that data inside of some of the Office client tools aside from SharePoint, such as Word, Excel, or taking content offline using SharePoint Workspace 2010 and Outlook 2010. The nice thing about this too is that it's very simple to set up. It's all using a mouse and a keyboard and everything. You don't need to go through and get a developer and IT pro involved in deploying anything. As you saw, we didn't really deploy anything in the last in one of the demos here. But the nice advantage of this as well is that we can go more advanced. If we have more complex scenarios that we want to achieve based on our business requirements, we can go through and use the same infrastructure but extend it and go a little more custom. So we can go through and create custom user experiences, custom UIs, custom implementations inside of Office using custom code and such. That's all available to us as well as part of the same infrastructure. One of the things too that will be kind of nice about this is that we have these things called the .NET Assembly connectors, which we'll get to a little bit in another session, which will allow us to go through and define what our data sources look like, not just being based off of SQL or as a SQL-based data source or a web service. So in this slide here, what we're showing is that you've got lots of different options here in terms of where your solution is going to live and how complex they are, and then what things you would use to achieve those different scenario goals. For instance, over on the left side, if you have a more basic kind of approach and you want things to run like on the server, you've got like SharePoint Designer that you're going to use to create those external content types. But if things are going to work up on the client, then you would use tools like Word and Outlook and SharePoint Workspace to consume those external content types. But on the more advanced side, you would use Visual Studio to create a .NET Assembly connector that would live on the server, and then create other kind of solutions that are living on the client, such as things with the Office clients or maybe custom Visto packages or something like that, that would live inside the Office clients. So just a very wide range of different opportunities that we have there. So let's take a look a little bit at what the development approach looks like for creating some of these different applications. What you would have is a SharePoint developer is going to go through and going to create one of these custom .NET assembly connectors that's going to talk to some sort of a back-end system, a line of business app, or really whatever you really want it to be here. He's also going to go through and build all the custom UI and everything, and then all that stuff is all going to be boxed up either in a WSP to go deploy to the server in the case of, like, say, a .NET assembly connector. Maybe there's workflows associated and stuff like that as well. And or he may go through and package this stuff up as a click once application that would work for, say, on the as an Office client type piece there that you would add into it. So he would build these two kinds of things here, then hand it over to the IT administrator, the IT pro, who would then take that information and then import it into SharePoint, into both, like, say, a development server or a QA or a production environment, import that stuff in, and then do any kind of configuration that needs to be done. And then what you would have is over on the far side here, you would have some of you'd have developers, you'd have solution integrators, you'd have IT pros, really anybody that can go through and can then leverage some of these custom things that you've deployed. They can leverage them from within SharePoint. So I could leverage a custom .NET connector in SharePoint Designer that was developed by a developer to say that we're talking to some other system, like if you had a outsourced CRM system. Even though if it didn't have a web service layer or it didn't have a database layer and there was some other communication you used to talk to it, you could create a .NET connector that would talk to it and then deploy that .NET connector and then have your power users use SharePoint Designer to create an external content type and then have them select as a data source type. It would be a .NET connector. So it gives you a little more options there. I already showed a little bit of SharePoint Workspace. This is the ability of taking SharePoint sites offline. It's the primary offline story that we have within SharePoint today in the 2010 timeframe. The nice thing about this is that the UI very much feels like a SharePoint site, and then you get to see all the data in a list, get to interact with it, get to add and update and delete it, and you can do this when you're either online and connected or when you're offline. The advantage when you're offline, or the advantage of SharePoint Workspace, is that it's smart enough to know if you're on or offline, and it just caches up all the changes that you're doing when you're offline. Then when you reconnect, it gives you this nice error or conflict resolution if data has changed and you're trying to change the same data since you were last connected. And so it gives a nice little error and conflict resolution thing that you can deal with. It also, out of the box, is going to index all of the stuff inside of the SharePoint site that it's taken offline, and will let you search for content across those different lists and libraries and stuff, so you don't have to go back to SharePoint to try and find where the stuff is. One of the nice things too about SharePoint Workspace is that if you define any custom forms using InfoPath, which you can do with a combination of SharePoint Designer and InfoPath, those forms will be pulled down, and they will load inside SharePoint Workspace as your own custom forms. All right. So now let's just touch on a little bit of the security and the authentication story here within custom applications in the BCS architecture. So we have a bunch of different options here on how the security is going to work and what things are available to us. You can see here from this table just showing us what the different options are that are available to us. So you've got in WCF or inside of a database or a .NET connector, you've got the different options with SQL authentication. You could use NTLM and do the pass-through authentication, where it would take what we were doing earlier actually, which was taking my credentials as I was logging into SharePoint, and it was using passing those credentials along to SQL to see if I had access to get into that database. I could use claims-based authentication here, and just a bunch of different options here. Okay, so a bunch of different options that we have available to us. How does the authentication work? Well, I just was kind of talking a little bit about how this worked here, where you have, a couple different options, which is you have pass-through, which is going to take the credentials of the current person and pass those on. You could do a revert to self option here, which what that's going to do is it's going to basically fall back and use the identity of the BCS service to log into the site to get access to it that way. All those different options are available to us to connect to these different applications here to get to the different data sources, right? So in this little session here, we talked about building custom applications, BCS security, and then also the various authentication options that are available to us.